Resuming debate, the honourable member for North Okanagan-Shuswap.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise today just in advance of Remembrance Day. And at this opportunity, I'd like to just mention that I had a grandfather, Jesse Pullen, that served for during the war in England in the First World War, immigrated to Canada with his family, my mother and her sister and his wife in 1925. And then because of his devotion to that country initially and to Canada, he actually went back and fought in the Second World War for Canada. So he fought 2 different world wars for 2 different countries. Very proud of him and some of the honor that he installed in me. Madam Speaker, $400 million. Just imagine what that could have done if it had made its way into the hands of hardworking Canadians who work day in and day out to bring home powerful paychecks. I start with that because it is the thought I want everyone to focus on as we continue debate on this motion of privilege. Madam Speaker, it is an honour to rise today as a representative for the good people of the North Okanagan-Shuswap. They go to work day in and day out trying to bring home paychecks that will get them a comfortable home, feed their families, and keep the heat on, and with any luck, save up for their retirement. I proudly rise to speak today on the issue of the point of privilege raised by my colleague, the Honourable Andrew Scheer, the Honourable Member for Regina Capel. And for those Canadians who still may be unclear as to why we are still debating this point of privilege, I'll once again give a condensed history of the situation. I'll quote from my honourable colleague from South Shore St. Margaret's for the initial information because he has been diligently digging up the breaches of conflict of interest on this file. I'll quote, "There is a foundation set up in 2001 called Sustainable Development Technology Canada with the purpose of providing taxpayer financial assistance to green technology companies before they become commercialized. Since this government was elected, the foundation has received $1 billion of taxpayer money. The result of probing by parliamentary committees is that we found that in 82% of the funding transactions approved by the Board of Directors during this 5-year sample period that the Auditor General had looked at, 82% of those transactions were conflicted." End quote. So on June 16th of this year, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Regina Capel, rose on a question of privilege, following notice under Standing Order 48, concerning the failure of the government to comply with the order that the House adopted on Monday, June 10th. A majority of the House voted that day, June 16th, to compel the government to produce a series of unredacted records concerning Sustainable Development Technology Canada, now known as the Green Slush Fund, a body engulfed in one of the worst Liberal scandals in recent years. And I say one of the worst because there have been many. On September 26th of this year, 6 weeks ago, the Honourable Speaker presented his ruling on that question of privilege raised by the member for Regina Capel. And I'll quote from the Honourable Speaker's ruling. "The procedural precedents and authorities are abundantly clear. The House has the undoubted right to order the production of any and all documents from any entity or individual it deems necessary to carry out its duties. Moreover, these powers are a settled matter, at least as far as the House is concerned. They have been confirmed and reconfirmed by immediate predecessors as well as those more distantly removed." End quote. The Speaker further went on and stated, quote, the chair cannot come to any other conclusion but to find that a prima facie question of privilege has been established. So here we are today, now 6 weeks after that Speaker's ruling, debating the same motion and the amendments to it that the government produce the documents, which is they have thus far refused to provide to this House. All other legislative debate has been halted until the Prime Minister and his government acknowledge the will of the majority of members of this House to turn over the documents. Time and again, member after member around this chamber have stated all that is required. Just produce the documents. So I've provided a condensed history of how we got here to where we are today, and now it is up to the Prime Minister to decide how do we get through today, tomorrow, and however many tomorrows it takes to break this impasse. After all these weeks of defiance, Canadians are asking what is so damaging in these documents that the government would put all other legislative process aside in an attempt to cover up what these documents contain. How bad could it be? Could it be that the $400 million in question would have been better spent if it had reached the hands of those hardworking Canadians I opened with, instead of being used to line the pockets of Liberal insiders? Could it be so bad that the Prime Minister cannot find anyone else to throw under the wheels of the bus except himself or a close friend, so he's choosing to throw our democratic process and the purpose of this chamber under the bus instead? Madam Speaker, imagine what could have been accomplished if the $400 million of this green slush fund scandal had been allocated in a manner that helped Canadians and the communities they call home. Instead of creating yet another scandal, this Liberal NDP government could have literally saved lives. Investing $400 million in addictions treatment could have saved lives in the ongoing opioid crisis that claimed at least 47,162 lives in Canada between June 2016 and March 2014. Under this government, more Canadians have lost their lives to the opioid crisis than were lost in World War II combat. 14,260, or 30% of those lives, were lost in my home province of British Columbia, including lives lost in my constituency of North Okanagan-Shuswap. These dark realities are a very important reason why the government must release the unredacted documents so the Green Slush Fund scandal can be investigated. When I'm connecting with citizens of the North Okanagan-Shuswap and hear them talk about the needs and priorities of their communities, I don't just listen. I carry their voices to Ottawa to advocate on their behalf. I have repeatedly written to the Minister of Finance to convey the need for this government to initiate actions to fight the availability of illicit opioids and non-prescribed availability of controlled opioids. I repeatedly wrote and advocated for federal resources for prevention of opioid addictions and resources to assist those who are attempting to overcome addiction. I never did hear back from the minister or this government, but do you know who did? The characters that doled out $400 million in the Green Slush Fund scandal. This Liberal NDP government seems to have unlimited dollars for their friends, but won't even respond to the pleas from elected representatives of Canadians. $400 million could have saved the lives and prevented so much pain and the grief of parents, families, and loved ones of the many Canadians lost to the opioid crisis. Canada's housing crisis has also played out in the North Okanagan-Shuswap, and this is another burning issue that I have repeatedly conveyed to this government that is more concerned with helping its friends than it is concerned with helping Canadians. For instance, 8 years ago, in 2016, I hosted roundtables in the North Okanagan Shuswap to discuss the matter of housing with representatives from local governments, First Nations, social services, construction, real estate, and organizations assisting Canadians facing challenges in securing housing. Following these engagements, I wrote the Finance Minister and shared the great opportunities for the government to recognize the existing willingness of private investors and developers to construct new rental stock and mobilize this willingness with reasonable incentives. I wrote the minister again in 2018 and stated, quote, "Many of these Canadians are below or near the poverty line exhibit determination to work hard to improve their positions, but the absence of affordable housing is undermining their aspirations and efforts." Again, I received no response. And this government didn't take the actions suggested. Their response was inaction, and they actually made the housing crisis worse by driving up costs, driving up rents, and housing and rental stock scarcity with out-of-touch policies. $400 million. It could have gone a long way in helping unleash construction of new homes for Canadians, but instead, it was allocated to the shady insider dealings of the Green Slush Fund scandal that this government must stop covering up. $400 million could have provided Canadians water security had the monies been allocated for water and wastewater treatment systems that I have repeatedly advocated to this government over the years. In 2017, I wrote the Finance Minister on behalf of the Squalaxchishquetmik, or Little Shuswap Band, who had identified to me the need for $300,000 required to extend water service for up to 20 homes. At that time, I also raised the needs of the Splatson First Nation for a sanitary sewage system for homes that were on average 40 years old that lacked access to treatment services. I told the minister how the reserve was subject to regular boil water advisories and needed support from Ottawa to establish a wastewater treatment plant, and the minister never did respond. Wow. In the same correspondence, I advocated on behalf of the Okanagan Indian Band, who had also required support to establish water and wastewater treatment systems to meet the government's requirements. Over the years, I've also delivered urgent requests from the government to support wastewater and water and wastewater treatment systems for the Nisconluth Indian Band, Adams Lake Indian Band, City of Salmon Arm, Community of Falkland, communities of Scotch Creek and the North Shuswap, Sorrento, Blind Bay, and the South Shuswap, and the village of Chase. Again, I never received a response saying that this government had resources for these essential projects, but do you know who did receive a response? Again, friends of the Liberal NDP government over the Green Slush Fund. They heard back from this government and they received $400 million. Self-interest and political interest eclipsed the needs of these communities that needed support to protect their community, their health, and protect our waters. This is another reason why we are here today calling on this government to finally release unredacted documents so that the $400 million Green Slush Fund can finally be investigated. Over the years, I've also conveyed to this government many other needs and priorities of the North Okanagan Shuswap that could have been supported with the $400 million that need to be investigated in the Green Slush Fund. In 2016, I sought government support for the $5 million required to connect the communities of Seymour Arm and Shuswap Lake to hydroelectric service. In the same year, I identified the need for federal support for assessments of biofuels and renewable energy in the Sicamous area and biomass heating systems in Enderby. In 2018, I advocated for support of a natural gas line to supply the Adams Lake and Little Shuswap Indigenous communities. All of these projects could have delivered benefits for citizens and communities, but the government didn't respond to my advocacy with support, but they did make sure there were $400 million for that green slush fund. Since 2016, I've been pleading with this government to prioritize the removal of unexploded ordnance, or UXO, from the lands of the Okanagan Indian Band. UXO are a lingering legacy of wartime training ranges on the lands of the Okanagan and blocking economic development and the jobs and prosperity the economic development could bring, but it continues to be stymied because the government has not ensured the UXO are cleared. Just this morning, I received correspondence from the Okanagan Band administration on this very issue that persists because this government has not prioritized resolving this matter. This is yet another example of what good could have been achieved if those $400 million had not been sent to the Green Slush Fund. Canadians have no choice but to pay taxes, and Canadians deserve to know what their tax dollars are being spent on. And Canadians deserve to have tax dollars spent in a manner that results in equitable, meaningful benefits. The Liberal government and their NDP accomplices continue to deny Canadians transparency and value for spending. And my Conservative colleagues and I will continue to fight to expose what happened to the $400 million that clearly should have been allocated for the benefits of Canadians, not the benefits of insiders. Madam Speaker, as I've said before, the parliamentarians, at least on this side of the House, take our roles very seriously. Members of His Majesty's loyal opposition have a job to do, and that is to hold the government of the day accountable. It is part of making sure that the people back home in the North Okanagan Shuswap and across Canada get to bring home the paychecks they work so hard to earn. Madam Speaker, I want to take us back a few years to the 2013 timeframe, a time of political, to the 20-year time frame when this was stated, and I'll quote, "Political leadership is about raising the bar on openness and transparency. As a member of Parliament, as a leadership candidate, and now leader of my party, I have taken every opportunity to raise the bar when it comes to openness and accountability. As leader of my party, I made raising the bar on transparency and openness my first major policy announcement, so that Canadians can better hold their leaders accountable. For me, transparency isn't a slogan or a tactic, it's a way of doing business. I trust Canadians, I value their opinions, and now that I've heard them, I'm going to act." Madam Speaker, that statement came from our current Prime Minister. I think it's a far cry from what we're seeing happening right now, where transparency is nowhere to be found. He did say that sunlight was the best disinfectant, I believe. Madam Speaker, why would this government continually be involved in conflict of interest and scandals? Well, it's simple. They're Liberals. That is why they continue to do this. They continue to be found in breach of ethics. So they must be held accountable. They must turn over the documents as ordered by this House. Canada will be better off for it. I will close with the same message I opened with. $400 million. Just imagine what could have been done if it had been put into the hands of hardworking Canadians who work every day, day in and day out, trying to bring home powerful paychecks. Thank you, Madam Speaker.